Hello, thanks for joining. Really excited to talk with you all today. My name's Kirsten Ely, and today we're going to talk about the reality many enterprises are facing, which is how to effectively build and scale in a really quickly changing space. My name is Kirsten. I'm the manager of our go-to-market strategy for AI products here at LaunchDarkly, and I'm joined by my colleague Marek, who's the head of AI. We're going to take a closer look at what's happening in the market and why there's such a divide between AI projects stalling and prototype to those reaching production and driving real business impact for the organizations building them. We'll also take a look at what this looks like in action and how LaunchDarkly is helping organizations build faster with AI. Quick housekeeping, there are some polls that will be popping up, so feel free to answer those or drop any questions that you have in the chat. Thanks again for being here. To frame our conversation today, I want to start by referencing the MIT paper that came out a couple of weeks ago and introduced a lot of market volatility. And Sam Altman actually called out AI as a bubble. This, however, doesn't mean that 95% of AI pilots out there are bad and only 5% are good. Rather, by taking a closer look, this is really a skill issue. There are good implementations that are working, and there are bad or superficial ones that aren't. So to take a closer look, there are four key areas that are really making this challenging for 95% of AI products out there. First, there's no feedback loop. So these systems aren't able to adapt and grow. They're set and forget projects left to be on their own journey. Some are because it's challenging working with systems that aren't customizable. So think an out of the box chatbot where you're not able to go and optimize for your organization and make it better for your specific use case. Another reason would be it's challenging to track specific metrics within the context of your business. So you're not able to understand the impact of the Gen AI products easily and in a way that's connected to opportunities for improvement. Last, there's a lot of caution in this space. This is quickly changing. There are non-deterministic models being introduced. So there's a real fear about making changes to a product that's maybe sort of working, but maybe isn't that great. To frame this, an out of the box chatbot can be great and is often in that 5%, but they're only great if they're actually customizable. So if you're rolling out a pre-baked chatbot, you're solving a specific problem with a general solution. So let's take a closer look at a real world example. I want to identify that there's a common misconception in the AI space that the way you build an AI solution is with a generalist model, think ChatGPT paired with a little bit of internal data. This gives you sort of generalist behavior who maybe knows a little bit about your product, a little bit about my colleague here, and knows a lot about a lot of other random stuff. So this isn't really going to be able to go into detail about anything. So in this instance, say Marek has a question about his mortgage. This is giving him a general response, not solving his problem, and rather it's making him really mad. And he's probably going to beeline to your customer support call, frustrated, asking for help.
It's totally making me mad. Totally, totally.
Mark just wants to know how his organization is or how he's able to pay his mortgage. And
I really
so
do. Yeah.
Mark, how much mortgage, right? So he's being asked to help a real person, which isn't really helping. So what's the problem here? This is a generalist AI, meaning it's not able to really improve, and all you're able to do here is prompt engineer his chatbot with limited surface area for improvement. These tend to fail because they don't get better. And because even more so is because they can't. They're just a one size fits all solution, which is a band-aid approach to a real business problem. Sorry, Marek. But let's look at the other 5% in contrast and what makes them not only good, but really, really good, where they're able to help drive really efficient business gains. What's different here versus the others? So one, they have the ability to learn, meaning they can remember things. They're deeply integrated into an application environment that involves some sort of history or memory. These can also grow directly in response to business metrics, meaning that they're tools that make it possible to understand the impact on your business bottom line. These are also guarded, so you can trust them because you have walls in place that can prevent them from behaving badly. So if you trust your system, then you have the confidence to take a hedge and manage risk to improve it versus before we were like, we have a sort of okay solution, but it's meeting my needs, but I'm afraid to change it. So again, the name of the game here is continuous improvement in order to succeed. So let's take a look at this example here with the model. So for Mark, instead of a single generalist, what if we have a network of specialists here, where we can ask a smaller, more efficient model in the center of a specialist group of agents the same question? This would appeal to other agents within the network, so perhaps one that had access to Mark's information in a data store in Snowflake, another that had access to RAG, which was built around our organization's mortgage policies, and another that can tie all this information together in a draft form into something more formatted in accordance with our brand voice. And yes, now Mark is happy. Mark, how's your mortgage payment
Uh,
looking?
I'm so happy about this. Yay, I got an answer that means that I don't actually have to create a support ticket or talk to anybody. And I'm a very introverted person, so I'm ecstatic about that.
Well, this is great. I mean, my goal in this business and LaunchDarkly is to make Marek happy. We work really closely together. However, in order to build this great system that's meeting the needs of Marek and our business, we've taken a risk, right? We've introduced into the agent network the ability to do things, to be agentic and work across internal systems. But what happens if this specialist agent looking for Mark's information pulls up perhaps my information? Maybe I'm less responsible than Mark, and the other agents don't realize that I pulled the wrong customer information, and we're going through the workflow as planned. And now Mark gets my mortgage where I'm less responsible. Mark, how do you feel now?
I'm terrified. That's a big money. And worse, I'm actually really, afraid of my mortgage provider because it's giving me the information that belongs to somebody else. So wow, yikes. That's definitely a big whoops.
Right. So, what really happened here, and how do we solve this and build an agentic system that's actually helping Marek? So, in order to proceed, we really need to understand the surface area of risk here. So, what went wrong? In order to do this, we need the tooling to actually understand who was impacted, how severely, and why. And in order to do this, we need the information at a really specific per node level. You can't just look at the aggregate outcome of this system because you need to understand which agent pulled the wrong information from Mark. This is something that LaunchDarkly can do through our AI observability platform. However, observability ultimately happens after the fact. It's a lagging indicator, and it's only helpful in preventing the next issue, not the current live in production issue. Another key piece of this puzzle is evaluation, or the ability to inject a supervisor agent into your agent network, which is hugely important. AI agents are actually really, really good at reporting on other agents. So think about in this context, LaunchDarkly can help you inject evals into your application, and those agents can then look at the output of other agents in real time. If the instance where Mark's information was pulled kicked an incorrect response, or perhaps something that was inappropriate outside of brand guidelines, you can then reevaluate the response or pass the metrics into LaunchDarkly. So we've learned that in this very quickly changing space, the type of development that is worse for GenAI is not working linearly or on a step-by-step basis to improve something. You don't get a better or real result from GenAI by tweaking a prompt once, but rather creating many, many different versions of a prompt and tracking the outcome. So we get a lot of attention and we have a lot of positive conversations with folks who are working with multi-agent systems who want the ability to create many, many different versions and look at the different parameters and abstract how those are impacting the overall goal of the business. So the idea here is that you could easily test 4 or 40 different variations in a prompt or slightly different models or slightly different tools and track their efficacy either on the pre-prod side or in a production context, perhaps just starting with your beta users. LaunchDarkly is providing these capabilities, but moreover, we do so in a way that's connected to an experimentation engine built into our platform. So you could actually do some really serious statistical analysis on your metrics to consistently improve and optimize towards your best result. So to return to the MIT paper, it's not enough to just look at GenAI metrics. You have to have a sense of how your GenAI application is actually impacting your business. And LaunchDarkly gives you the ability to do this. Another really important part of the story here is establishing guardrails. And so when you're looking at these outputs from all of these different agents, we want to make sure to put metrics or a way to stop before something is committed to change. And if something like problematic content, hate speech, PII leaks, etc., are triggered, you can stop those before they harm your customer experience, which is hugely, hugely important. So again, looking at the big picture, we're looking at the context of these different objectives and measuring them around specific business-driven KPIs. And you're looking in this instance at latency, accuracy, like perhaps conversion or a next step KPI. In the case of the mortgage example, you could look at the rate with a customer would elect to sign up for autopay. If you're able to create many different versions of an agent network and track their respective effects, not just in objective terms, but in terms of your business outcome, now we've built a truly adaptive business tool. So I like thinking about this way. So perhaps you've made a bad decision, and with all these changing variables, this is very commonly happened where you're introducing perhaps a mediocre model into your network. Your guardrail will now catch it, the metrics are passed, and they trigger an automatic rollback. At LaunchDarkly, this is something we call a guarded rollout. And so let's say accuracy is dropping because a given model wasn't performing or giving you a response within your business guidelines, we'll roll it back automatically. But that automatic rollback is giving you the confidence to trust and continuously improve and try better models based on your business needs. You can optimize your prompt and agent architecture for another metric and then promote it forward as it makes sense. And again, you can create variations on your model until you've found the best one for your use case in terms of your business. And again, as the new models and frameworks are continuously released in real time, the trick here is to build an application that has the flexibility to continuously improve and reap the benefits of those improvements. So to zoom out at the big picture, good AI is self-healing. It'll revert back to where a risk was mismanaged. LaunchDarkly is actively supporting your self-healing approach for GenAI architecture. Again, this is essential to have trust, but also have the ability to make commitments to improving your application in real time in production. And as we look to the future, this is a really exciting and quickly changing space. And we're introducing autonomous agents who are writing the code of tomorrow. So think about that change and very quickly impact your environment when you're automating optimization, code generation, and improving all these things in real time in parallel. So self-optimizing AI is very, very close. And we're really excited to be part of that story, but we will have to carefully manage risk as you're building. So, when we think about this, an open question to everyone, I'd love for you to drop your response in the chat. How are you thinking about building trust, and how are you giving your team the confidence to forge ahead? But would love to take this story to life and let Marek show you what this looks like in action.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. That was great. I definitely think like I always want to like reiterate the point about confidence because like if you're kind of unable to assess, guard, protect some kind of change that you've made to some kind of Gen AI object, and you're scared of making any kind of change to it because you don't have those systems in place, and moreover, it's really so difficult to kind of measure the effects of those changes in some kind of linear, predictable way. You're just not going to do anything. So you're going to like plop out a kind of mediocre, first run Gen AI project, and it'll essentially sit there and gradually kind of move itself into obsolescence naturally. I think the kind of key outcome from that MIT paper that Kirsten referenced earlier is that like the models that survive, the models that actually deliver, a tremendous amount of business value are those that are instrumented in such a way that they can constantly change, they can adapt, they can optimize, and they can heal based on real world conditions. So yeah, demo time. Let's kind of show you a little bit of what this looks like in practice. There it is. So you can see right now here a little bit of what the AI Configs platform looks like. So I'm going to first start with like a little talk about what it means to kind of work iteratively in that way that's endemic to Gen AI. So basically working with variations. You totally need the ability to configure agents dynamically, and you need to be able to do that at some kind of scale with some kind of velocity. So going to the platform here, you can see that I have an agent. I'll pop it up right now. That's doing some resource work behind like a mental health chatbot kind of resource. And I picked this example because it's interesting. Like that's something that people are increasingly kind of turning to Gen AI for, especially ChatGPT, most famously or perhaps infamously, but also because it's like a really risky space to operate in, but also a very productive one. So I have three different variations of the retrieval agent behind this bot here. And in each one, I'm specifying things like what model to use, what model provider to take it from, what metadata or control data to leverage, what tools to use, and what kind of MCP connections to navigate, and then prompts as well, all within the platform. And what's going to happen is the agent structure or the workflow that's living in my application is going to automatically retrieve this information step of the conversation in order to continually update and configure that agent based on, decisions that I'm making upstream. And this is useful because I can easily duplicate, make a small tweak, make a change, clone, make a whole bunch of changes, etc., and then test the results at scale, either in pre-production or as a shadow release in production or just to beta users. So, I mean, like a very kind of simple and superficial example of this is let's go into the particular prompt for this part of the agent and say, answer all questions in French, for example. Can make this change really quickly. Change is applied. And I'm thinking about what to tell my mental health chatbot. Let's just say I'm happy today, which is true. And you can see now that the chatbot's going to respond in French, right? And of course, if I eliminate this entry right here, make the change back, ask it the same question, I'm going to get a response back in English now. That's great. Not a very not a very helpful response, kind of flippant to be totally honest, but at least I do get the ability to make that kind of level of configuration so quickly, and again, constrain it to one or more different variations, right? Um, so I have three different variations that I showed you on that first page. It's really easy for me to set up a split test for my beta users. So you can see that right here. So let's say I want to identify, a beta user and then serve them some kind of split here. Well, let me split out my beta user segment and then I'll serve them, let's say, a manual percentage of those particular models right next to each other, right? So I can serve, this one, this one, this one, maybe this one has a different prompt. This one maybe has a slightly different recourse to a tool, and I can look at the aggregated results of all that at scale. Yeah. So going back to the chatbot here, you can see that I'm getting metrics back. I'm getting responses back at scale. Now, that's totally true. That wasn't very, very helpful or accurate. I'm getting an accuracy score. I'm getting toxicity scoring. I'm getting relevance, grounding scores. They're live. They're actionable to me when making decisions. And I'm even also getting the reasoning back as well. And I'm using, it's really true. I'm using LaunchDarkly to power this evaluation, but I'm not actually running this evaluation within the LaunchDarkly platform. Instead, I'm using what we call a judge config, which we can customize and iterate upon in the same way that you would any other part of a multi-agent network. So we use a schema called geval here, which is an emerging standard for LLM judges, passing to a specialist node the, let's say, the content of a customer question, the context around who that customer is, the context an agent used to make a decision about an answer, source of truth information, and then a framework with which to evaluate that model's answer. And I can use evaluation metrics to make dynamic decisions around which agent node setting to use. So let's say like, in this particular case, instead of just rolling out a split to a beta user, let's say I really kind of have started to like this new variation that I constructed. I'm going to create a guarded rollout where I'm moving from the first edition of this agent to this third one that I constructed, this new variation. I'm going to guard this rollout based on my accuracy metric so that if accuracy dips below some metric, I can automatically revert this back and move back to the original version that I had trusted, right? So this again gives me the confidence to actually make commitments, actually make changes, and ultimately continue to improve that agent structure that I'm leveraging. So now, like, what happens if something goes wrong, right? Like, I can actually do something about it before it goes to the customer by leveraging what Kirsten was calling a guardrail. And so let me ask a really kind of cheeky question here. Having trouble with my spouse, for example. So let's see what the model says here. Okay. I mean, objectively a true-ish answer, but maybe a little bit toxic, maybe a little bit presumptuous about the status of something. Not necessarily the most useful useful return for like a frontline chatbot like this. But because I have in-step evals running, a guardrail fires if the toxicity scoring ramps up. So you can see here, well, I'm definitely getting a pretty high toxicity rating. This is like not a very nice response, especially for the particular context that it's operating in. And so what is happening under the hood is if the toxicity score leaps or the factual accuracy drops underneath some rating, I can automatically bring in a guardrail. Now, ultimately, what I would do is I wouldn't even show this message to the customer. I'm just displaying this here. But yeah, it gives you the alacrity to, make a change, let's say within the actual interface itself. In this case, I'm citing an alert. But even more interestingly, I'll show you this. I'm going to go to the targeting page again, and you can see it switched itself off. So because the guardrail fired, my automation has worked in such a way that allows me to, constrain or contain any kind of bad behavior. Again, I could definitely make sure to not send this message to the customer, make sure that I get some kind of visual impact here that something is maybe going wrong, or automatically make a routing change behind the surface to bring in another agent, an agent that we know is working, or and maybe altogether power off an agent that we know is not performing well. Lots and lots of opportunities for automation. Final piece for me, Kirsten was talking about metrics, especially business metrics. I can think of like three categories of metrics that we think everyone should care about when they're working with agentic AI. The first is like telemetry metrics. So how fast, how efficient, how many tokens are you using? How expensive is the process that you're working with? You can see we're also piping in all of that information as first party metrics directly back to the platform via the SDK. We also care about evaluative metrics. So accuracy, toxicity, grounding, relevance, all those things coming from an evaluator. That's another type of metric that you can use to inform decisions about the GenAI workflow that you're working on. But then the third is those business metrics, ROI, next step KPIs, customer KPIs, things that like can actually be used to leverage how you grow, adapt, and change your model over time. So like metrics are actually really easy to set up. Metrics are contained here. This is the metrics pane right here, and I'll show you. I'll just create a new metric and call it, customer API or anything like that. But at the end of the day, all you really need to do is identify the metric that you care about, type it in some way, and then associate its key with a variable that's within your application. And our SDK will do all the hard work of pulling those metrics and connecting them to their exposures. From there, you have tons and tons of dashboards, trend analyses, analytical tools that you can use within our platform or even natively within a data warehouse like Snowflake to understand the patterns behind those metrics. So I'm showing, let's say, an experiment right here. This is within our experimentation engine, lots and lots of super beefy, muscular, statistical stuff going on here. But it's really giving you like a super powerful perspective on how multiple variables performed against each other when, in this case, choosing against different models associated with an agent node. So I can see, these four models went with this particular agent node and led to these outcomes. I can see, some kind of play against accuracy, strong differentiation against duration, extremely strong differentiation against cost right here. And like the amount of potential detail here is really extraordinary because like you can get not only a sense of like which agent setting worked best according to the metrics that you care about, be it telemetry, evaluation, or your business KPIs, but also like which conditions, which customers, which exposures, which contexts led to changes in behavior. And that lets you actually dynamically model out things like cost, for example, which is really, really hard to do if you don't have that kind of level of granularity. So that's enough for me in terms of kind of showing you what this looks like, from a very surface level perspective. Would love to show you more. Would love to talk about this in more detail. I think it's a really, really powerful platform. You can see that a poll just popped up. If you'd love to chat about this in some way, please hit yes, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Show you something a little bit more technical, a little bit of a deeper dive. Happy to do some Q&A now. Cool. So I'm looking at the Q&A right now. What's the best way to quantify trust and quality in an AI feature? Is it a case-by-case basis for each company, or are there industry standards around metrics like toxicity or relevance? It's a really, really good question. I think like something that's interesting is that it seems like we've all come to an agreement that like benchmarking a model is you're allowed to do that in a very general way. You're allowed to say like this model is good and this model is bad based on, let's say, some kind of academic study that these models are good at physics exams, they're good at solving the math Olympiad, like they're benchmarked in these really abstract ways that are meant to be generalized. And the way that I think about the answer to this question is like certainly there are general objective standards that we should hold the agents that we're building to, but also a lot of it is highly contingent on the type of application you're building because at the end of the day, you're ultimately trying to deliver business value. And so the real question is like, which metrics are more or less relevant in the context of unlocking something like business value, which is totally, totally something you can leverage this platform for. Examples all come from cloud LM. Yeah, okay. So here's a great question in the chat. Examples all come from cloud LM providers like OpenAI or Bedrock. Does your platform work with self-hosted LMs? It absolutely does. I love self-hosted LLMs. I'm a huge self-hosted LLM practitioner. And I think at the end of the day, something I really want to make clear as I go back into the variations pane right here is that you can easily add your own custom model. What essentially is happening under the hood is our SDK is importing this information as a kind of feature flag variant. It's unpacking it from model destinations, model provider associations, control data, prompts, and tools. But then, moreover, and I think most importantly, it's unpacking that as text. So essentially, you can add a custom model. It could be self-hosted. It could live anywhere. It really doesn't matter. So yes, while we provide a lot of examples for cloud hosted, especially yielding to the hyperscalers, we're actually seeing a lot of adoption in self-hosted and even custom models. Totally something that's supportable by this infrastructure because we're not actually an intermediary for your customer's relationship to those models. We're just providing configuration information. So the answer is overwhelmingly yes. That's a great, great use case. And I'm excited about a world where I'm seeing a lot more self-hosted stuff. Maybe a point of differentiation is that there's a lot of folks out there who are building proxies, relays, matrix routers, things like that to help customers solve the problem at very least of who to send on which model. Our targeting infrastructure is a lot more complex than that, but that's definitely a problem on everybody's mind. But most common solutions kind of appear in the form of something like an API gateway. This is true of evaluations as well, where you're essentially bringing in some kind of third party to mediate that relationship between your customer, the model, and your application. And we're kind of interestingly nestled before any of that happens. We're not an intermediary. We're not a single point of failure. We're a configuration service that's happening in step with the conversations, but isn't living in the middle of those conversations in a way that, can create problems around, let's say, data management, for example. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, we're almost at time. We can sit for another minute or so, and then I think I'll be happy to leave you to. Oh, someone else in the Q&A. Just the risk of negative. How do we reduce the risk of negative user experiences when A/B testing in production? Yeah. So this is a great question. So I mean, the first and probably best way to think about this is why not deploy this in some kind of shadow environment? That's where the Darkly and LaunchDarkly really comes from, which is the idea of like, okay, uh, we can serve all the results of this information back to the customer, but it might actually be more interesting to instead hide those results from the customer and collect that information and evaluate it after the fact. This is really useful because I think a lot of people tend to over-index on pre-production as the only kind of site where you can do any kind of real testing, while at the same time recognizing that edge cases seem to only ever really actually happen in production. Like that's where the interesting stuff happens. So yeah, I mean, shadow testing is a really, really great way of thinking through this problem. In addition, like do A/B testing, but put it behind a guardrail, put an evaluator in the loop to make sure that you're only servicing responses back that meet your standards.
And I think this ties to the point that we want to, of course, test everything in pre-prod and make sure it's great. But what's different is the need to continuously improve and do this in a production-like setting. So it's really helpful to make sure to have the confidence that this guardrail will prevent anything negative from happening and impacting your end user. So I think it's the flexibility that unlocks that continuous improvement that's really critical here. See, I know we're at time. Do we have any more Q&A? We can stay on a couple more minutes, of course.
Well,
While we're hanging out, we want to thank you for joining. And of course, Mark
exactly.
and I talk about this all day, every day. So we'd be happy to look at this in the context of your own organization based on what you're building. So we'll hang out a little bit, but really grateful for all of you for being here today.
All right. I can see the attendee count drop, so now feels like a good time to end it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, team.